Yeah, welcome to Lunch and Learn number 7. Welcome back to those of you who have been to our other webinars. I can't believe we're at number 7 now. And welcome to some new clients as well, because I know we've got quite a few new clients join today, so that's great. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Heathorn. I'm the MD of Just Search. And today we're just really excited just to reopen the discussion about back to office and new ways of working. As you guys will probably all know, and hopefully have all seen, we did some small bit of research a couple of months ago to understand what's going on with our clients and in the market. And we published that report last month. So hopefully everyone got to see that. I think if you haven't, Katie is going to share the link in the chat now. We'll obviously be delving, sort of touching on some of the report during the conversation. So yeah, feel free to have that open. And we're really excited to have a really fantastic panel. We always get great panels, and today is definitely no exception. So we got Sophie Denman making her Jossie webinar debut. So Sophie is the EA and Office Manager at MedAccess. We've got Pete Lockett, who's the COO at Capan Asset Management, welcoming Pete back. Pete joined us in Back to Office 1.0, which I think was in July last year. So really sort of intrigued to see how things have progressed there. And then the ever-present, very cool paddleboarding lawyer, Greg Jones, partner at Green & Green Solicitors. So welcome, guys. As always, please, it's great if these sessions are interactive. So use the chat to share information, resources, etc., and then obviously use the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar to ask specific questions. You can ask those anonymously, and we will endeavour to get to those as we go. And if not, we will address them at the end. So yeah, please do ask questions. You know, the hope is that these sessions, aim to be really valuable and to provide actionable insight for you guys. So please do ask questions as well. And it's sort of setting the scene in terms of just quickly the objective and the context. So today is definitely about discussing the opportunities and challenges of kind of the new ways of working. And the guys are going to come from it, hopefully from different perspectives, because I think we all agree there's no silver bullet, there's no right way. And I think we just want to lean into people's experiences, understand what they've gone through, their company's journey, et cetera, and get lots of sort of healthy debate around that. But just to give it a little bit of structure, we'll kind of go into some general conversation about it. But I want to touch on a couple of key sort of topics. So productivity, mental health, legal, attraction and retention of talent, which is obviously key to everyone and to us as recruiters, and then to what the future might look like. And I touched on it before. Obviously, I mentioned Greg and Pete joined us for the Back to Office webinar 1.0 in July last year. And that was definitely very much focused on safety. And although safety is still paramount and front and center of people's plans and strategies, I think it's now become more holistic. It's more about ways of working and adjusting our ways of working, and that's kind of multifaceted. It touches all areas of business, and I think people are very much looking at it on a sort of longer term basis now and trying to figure out what this looks like for the longer term future of their business. And us at Just Search, we're certainly no different. We're trying to design new ways of working, and it's been challenging for us as leaders and challenging for our guys as well, because it does change. We are testing and learning and trying to figure out the right way, based on our culture and objectives, et cetera. So I'm really looking forward to sort of some healthy conversation, debate on this. Before we start, quickly, we're just going to do a quick poll. So Katie's going to flash up a quick poll just to understand where the audience is in terms of back to office and what the sort of working model. So question number one, we'll just sort of 30 seconds on this. Where are you with your back to office plans? And then the second part of the question is, what working model are you planning to implement? So let's just give this sort of 20 seconds. If you can just sort of place your votes, be very grateful. Just give it a few more seconds. I actually can't see the voting. Katie, I think you can probably see it. So whenever it looks like the majority of people have voted. If you just want to set it live. Cool. So where are you with your back to office plans? So the majority, so 59%, well, but needs work, which I think, yeah, I think that's certainly where we are as a business. But, you know, a decent number of people are back in the office already or kind of early stages. So I think it's a good spread. And I think today we'll kind of cover all those angles. And then the second part, what working model are you planning to implement? So I think it's a resounding 76% are trying to implement a hybrid working model, which is kind of, you know, what I think the majority of companies out in the press and elsewhere are trying to do. So thank you very much for that. So I think it'd be good if we kicked off. So Sophie, if I could start with you being the debutante. So if you could just sort of briefly introduce yourself and your business and just kind of let us know where MedAccess are in terms of back to office and your sort of new ways of working.
Yeah, so hi everyone. As Ben said, I'm Sophie Denman. I'm the Executive Assistant and Office Manager at MedAccess Guarantee Limited. We are a social finance company, so our mission is to improve access to affordable healthcare products in countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. We do this by providing a financial guarantee to organizations who manufacture and or produce vaccines, medicines, diagnostic tests, and medical devices. We started in 2017 and are based in London, Victoria. I was actually one of the first employees at MedAccess alongside the CEO and the COO. And I've been working for about 3 years supporting the organization grow, develop, expand the team. And we've moved from originally being working in the office 5 days a week, so sort of 9 to 5:15 in London, Victoria. And then about 6 months before lockdown, we moved into flexible working. So it was quite new. People weren't really adapting to it that well. They felt almost a bit guilty leaving early or finishing at 4 and doing the other hour on the train. But we started implementing the idea of being flexible. And then obviously with COVID, it just really fast tracked that. Everyone got really used to managing their own schedules. And so I was asked to project manage the sort of end-to-end plan of moving to hybrid working, which we've officially finalised and launched as of the 17th of May. And that is for our 17 staff members. So yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing this further today.
Great. And just out of interest, what does hybrid look like from a working week typically for you guys?
I mean, it's quite difficult because we haven't got a typical working week. We've been very remote. So we've followed the government guidelines quite strictly and haven't gone back into the office. But since we've opened, mainly from the 17th of May, we're seeing a real interest in people using the office space. So everyone had to come in and have a health and safety tour with me, view the facilities, get their access fob. And they all sort of indicated they'd come in just for that bit and then go home. But I saw everyone actually come in and then spend the rest of the day in the office. And then those people are getting really used to being back in the office. I thought it would be 2 or 3 individuals mainly, but everyone is rotating around. We implemented a desk booking system. So you can't actually use our head office unless you book a desk. So seeing that platform, we can see how people are using the space, who's using it. And at the moment, people are starting to come in about 1 to 3 times a week, typically. And it's mainly the majority of staff.
Great, that's really interesting. Pete, same question for you, really. To give us a bit of an intro and sort of let us know where you and Cape-Ann are with your sort of back to office and working plans. I think it's probably slightly different to the majority.
Yeah. I mean, Cape-Ann, we're a similar size firm to Sophie's. There's I think about 18 of us in the UK office, one based out of the US. I think when we spoke back in July, we were probably at a stage then when we had a majority of the office back, but not the full office. And certainly throughout, other than a 2-week period where a couple of the guys in the office actually had COVID, when we closed the office down at that point, we have had a presence in the office throughout. It was a core presence, I would say, of 6 or 7 staff in the main, particularly during lockdowns 1. and we just had someone who could do the trading function, someone who could do the fund administration function, and an investment manager, because whilst the whole world sort of disappeared around us, markets were more volatile than ever. And we felt, from a fiduciary responsibility perspective to our clients, which include a lot of large pension funds, endowments, foundations, charities, etc., that we needed to have people based in the office who did the sort of time sensitive side of the work. So as we headed towards Christmas and obviously the longer lockdown we've had now, we effectively pushed some personal responsibility back onto the team and said to them, if they want to be back in, we will facilitate it, obviously, as safely as possible. We're, again, very fortuitous. We are the sole occupants of our building. We're able to fund private cars, so taxis, etc., for any staff who were coming in, so no one had to use public transport. We didn't put any pressure on public infrastructure that way. We have, since the new year, had COVID testing of all staff every week, so you can't come into the office on a Monday until you've signed off that you've tested, used one of the lateral flow tests, and come back negative. So we've tried to facilitate as safely as possible people working from the office. And the demand has been there. It was more, I was actually having to push back on people earlier in the year, saying that people wanted to come in and we couldn't have one person per bay of desks. So we needed to, at that point, ask one or two people to rotate. Now we've got to a stage where we're comfortable having everyone in, and we've put people into spare offices, etc. And we still only have, I think, one, maybe two bays of desks that have got two people on them, but there's still a good meter between each of those people because it's either side of the desk. So yeah, I think throughout this, we've tried to keep some office presence. As we head towards June 21st, the few people that still only do 3 days a week in the office will move back to doing 5 days a week in the office. We've tweaked our working from home policy. Well, we didn't really have a working from home policy before, but we have added some sort of flexibility, I would say, there, but we're still requiring people to have done a minimum of 3 years before they get any time working from home. And that looks at 25 days on an annual allowance. And then I've got the policy in front of me to remind myself exactly how many we gave to people. And then after 5 years, it's 40 days. And we still have roles that we don't deem possible to do from home. So, and is that office management, for example, we don't think the office manager can necessarily manage the office from home. We don't think fund administration, trading roles can be done from home because of the setups they need on specialized equipment such as Bloomberg, etc. So yeah, we've attempted to offset that by giving those staff additional holiday. Not that we're saying working from home is classed as a holiday, but the way we look at it is it probably saves on average 1 hour a day of commuting time. So we sort of assimilated that to be an additional 3 days annual leave for those who have been with us for 3 years rather than the 25-day allowance of working from home, and then 5 days for those who have been with us for 5 years. So that's our attempt to offset and avoid sort of a two-tier system where certain people get some privileges and others don't get anything. And that seems to have been well received within the team. And I mentioned it before when we spoke before the call. We don't think we've got everything right. I certainly don't think I have. I still think there's going to be changes need to be made. I think we're all still adjusting and adapting. And I think our sort of the outline that I've just given you there is specific to our company. I think every single company is very different. The people who work at each company, the situation each company is in. If you're in a massive office that's multi-occupancy, I still struggle to see how you can comfortably bring your team back into the office at this point in time. Even with cases as low as they are, I think the risk element of bringing people back in, and as like just a single positive test in an office of several thousand can result in the whole thing having to be shut down, and that can cause absolute chaos. So yeah, as I say, I would caveat what I've described as being very specific for our fact pattern rather than anyone else's.
Yeah, 100%. No, thanks for that, Pete. I think it's yeah, I think like we said, like I said at the start, you know, it is testing and learning as we go. But even though you're, I guess, in the majority of the time in office as a team, there's still so many considerations and, you know, thinking that you've done behind the scenes to kind of tweak how you work and how the guys work and benefit. So I think that's really interesting. Greg, I think it'd be really good to hear kind of the same question to you, really, given you're outside our sector and outside of London. I think you can give a unique twist on this.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm a partner in the employment team at Green and Green, and we're based sort of an hour outside of Liverpool Street. And whilst we do a lot of work in sort of the investment sector, we do act in a number of other sectors, so pharmaceutical, manufacturing, a lot in insurance, hospitality. And each of those sectors have come with their own challenges. And I think it was interesting just seeing the question there that Melissa's put, particularly to Sophie. But what's actually happened is the rule book across all of those sectors has just been torn up and it's been thrown. And then, particularly as HR professionals or as directors, we're being asked to be innovative in the way that we're going to maintain cultures and ways of working. But at the same time, we've got to ensure people are safe. We've got to look after health and safety. And then you've got all these other legal requirements, whether people are telling you need to be mindful of data protection, or what about discrimination rights or whistleblowing. So it's really difficult. Whatever sector you're in, there's different challenges. Manufacturing is a really good example. Clients where they've had to work throughout. There's no option. There's no how do we facilitate home working and maintain our culture. It's how do we get people in? What do we do if there's a test? What do we do about isolating people? What do we do about SSP and paying them? What about testing? Can we mandate people to have vaccines before they return to work? How do we keep hold of that health data? Whereas in sectors like law, as a law firm, most of our people can work from home. Some of them want to work from home, and some of them want to work from an office. And that's the difficult thing in trying to manage. And looking at productivity and mental health, it's so difficult to assess. Although you can do lots of surveys and look at sort of anecdotal data, I think some of it's quite skewed, because although productivity shot up initially, I think a lot of that was driven by adrenaline for a number of people. And now it's starting to come down. People are exhausted. And it's how do we then use office working to maintain engagement and drive that sort of productivity piece. What we've got to remember is the guidance at the moment is work from home where you can until the 21st of June. Whether things are going to relax on the 21st, who knows what's going to happen with various different variants and the effectiveness of vaccines. But what we do know is it's going to continue to be really challenging. There is exactly the point that you made, Ben. There is no sort of set of rules, follow this and you'll be fine. And Pete, going to your point, everyone's trying their best. Everyone will be making mistakes, and it's all about learning along that journey. So I think from my point of view, in summary, it's been a really, really challenging year for everyone. And there are so many different ways to approach it, but there are certain key legal risks that perhaps we can cover off as part of the call that people need to be mindful of.
Yeah, 100%. No, I think I definitely want to come on to those legal risks. I think it's really important that people are clear on that. But one thing I just want to sort of, thanks for what you mentioned, Greg. I think one point I'd like to start with and pull out is kind of that productivity piece. So from the research, 42% of respondents said that they were more productive working from home. And actually, we also referenced an EY survey, which suggested that private equity CFOs are post-pandemic, since people have been working from home, are less concerned about employee productivity and engagement. So I think there's a lot to suggest that people are more productive working from home. Totally take your point, Greg, though. It's kind of, how does that look like from you're coming off this adrenaline rush. But I think what I'd sort of like to pose that question to you, Pete, is, what do you in terms of productivity, do you think having the guys back in the office makes you as a business more productive?
I would agree with what Greg said before with regards to the productivity at the very beginning. Where it did shoot up. We were very surprised at just how much our team internally were churning out at that point in time. And a lot of the research was being written a lot faster. And I think people being away from any distraction, it actually helped. And I would also note that most of the distractions were closed as well. It wasn't like you could disappear off for a beer or go out with your mates. And I mean, that was what made this the most challenging year of my career. I remember 2008 vividly, but at least at the end of each day in 2008, when markets were falling all around us, you could have a bit of camaraderie and a bit of team spirit and go out and have a beer. Whereas this time around, it was just in your face and you had no escape and there was nothing else to talk about. And I do see that fatigue that Greg mentions really sort of kicking in now. Yes, it helps productivity having my guys all in the office, but I would say from a more as an outsider looking in at several big institutions, I have seen material issues as a result of them not having the teams working in close quarters with one another. Just on process-driven stuff, the middle and back office teams, when you're dealing with data sort of flow, you're getting to stages where normally if people are in the office, they would shout over to one another and say, have you seen this email from so-and-so? Have you looked at this? Have you done that? There's gaps appearing where people don't do that, because when you pick up the phone, it's more of a sort of an action to commit to. And even though it sounds silly and small, a lot of people don't enjoy picking up the phone, whereas when it's a conversation in the office, informally, it's a lot easier. And we've certainly seen errors on our accounts with our custodial banks, with some of our data vendors, etc., where things haven't been picked up. Someone's assumed someone else was looking at it. Work wasn't assigned correctly. So whilst productivity isn't necessarily falling, we do see processes having damage caused to them because those informal conversations aren't taking place like they were a year prior.
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of, productivity is obviously really hard to measure, but as you touched on, communication and collaboration, I know they sound sort of buzzwords, you hear it a lot, but it is small things, water cooler moments, the amount of creativity that happens in those when speaking to people that are not in your team in an informal setting is kind of intangible and invaluable. And I think that point you make, Pete, about just shouting across the office. So yesterday I was writing an email to respond to one of our guys, and I was just like, they're just sitting over there. It's a really simple question. I'm just going to ask them. So I think, that's a really interesting point. Sophie, productivity for you guys, how how are you viewing this? Are you seeing that people have been more productive working from home, and how is you guys coming back to the office in some capacity in your new kind of hybrid working way? Have you seen a bump in productivity since then?
Yeah, I mean, similar story. We've seen productivity shoot up. We've actually had quite a large number of deals this year than we did last year. We've done a big strategy refresh. But again, the same story, although productivity has gone up and we've probably done a lot more than we've ever done before in quite a short period of time, because everyone's had that time, we are witnessing burnout and mental health issues that we're trying to really focus on and be intentional about. So our senior management team have decided to no longer email staff after 6 p.m. or before 8 a.m. and try and draw that virtual line between work-life balance, because your laptop's available at all moments. You can just keep working, and we're witnessing staff just working through the evenings. I remember one of our managers sent an email about 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and everyone responded. So we noticed that, yes, we are really productive. It's going really well. We've achieved loads in the last year and a half, but we've really got to focus on people's mental health and make sure no one's burning out. And it's really hard. We don't know, this hybrid working is a trial period for us. We constantly have been saying, we've launched hybrid working. Here's our policy. Here's our home working support. Here's our expectations. However, it's trial. So any problems anyone's facing, any thoughts staff have about how to change it up a bit, it's in that we've got that period now to make sure we do it right and give everyone the opportunity to have a voice. But yeah, similar story, fantastic productivity, but really need to focus on making sure everyone's happy with the way they're working. I do think it's quite good to have the flexibility. So if staff are struggling working at home, they can now come in and break away from that environment. Or alternatively, they need to be at home for the school run, they've got the opportunity to. So we found that has helped people a bit, giving them that autonomy to choose. But yeah, similar story.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so important. The mental health aspect is so important, but there's implications both sides, isn't there? There's implications about kind of being in the office or coming back to the office and some, nervousness and apprehension, especially around commutes and things like that. But then on the other side, you've got people, in our survey, 93% of respondents said they were working longer hours and whilst they work from home, and there's this kind of blurring of professional and private life. Like you said, Sophie, people responding to emails at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. But it's really interesting what you say about the kind of no emails after 6 p.m. or before 8 a.m. I think that's quite It's quite interesting. Greg, I know you're passionate about mental health, and you do a lot of stuff around it. It'd be really good to get your kind of thoughts in terms from a mental health perspective and how that then perhaps bleeds into sort of kind of the legal implications.
Yeah, sure. I think from my point of view, it's just injecting that bit of fun back into what we do, and that probably sounds a bit odd coming from a lawyer, but actually, I really enjoy my job. I really enjoy what I do, but I enjoy being part of a team and sitting in that office environment and talking things through and sharing problems. And whilst we've been able to do that through lockdown, being at the end of a camera, I think in itself is quite exhausting. I think there's something about, if you sat in an office with a mirror on your desk for 12 hours, it'd be awful, wouldn't it? And I try as hard as I can when I'm on these just not to watch myself, but it is exhausting. And so I think there's a lot to be said in terms of mental health and just getting some of that enjoyment back. I mean, at Green and Green, we've done a number of initiatives. We did a sort of winter wellness challenge throughout the business to try and bring people together, just to try, again, bring a bit of fun back into it. Productivity, I do think it's difficult to measure. I mean, at our firm, we've seen people's hours go through the roof. Exactly as you're saying, Pete, there's not really a lot else to do other than work at the moment. But this week, I had a client breakfast and a client lunch. And before you know it, that's most of your day gone. And then you're thinking, wow, I was used to doing X amount of chargeable hours per day. I'm now going to have to continue to work till sort of 3 a.m. to make this happen. So I think as we adjust, that's going to be really difficult because people are used to working at a certain level and a certain expectation of them. And now we're going to be asking more. We're going to throw a commute into it. If we think about why do we have the office space? I mean, we've touched on it, but now it's that collaboration. Well, if you want people to collaborate, you need to create a space for them to be able to do that. But if they're collaborating, they're probably not doing things at the same pace or level of productivity as they were before. So there's going to be that shift. And I think as an employee, there's going to be an anxiety around that because actually I'm not going to be able to hit deadlines. So are we going to find that as we bring more people in, we're putting more pressure on them and they're actually doing even more hours? So the communication around how this is going to work is going to be key because employees work, I talk a lot about emotional needs, but understanding your sort of status, meaning, purpose, control, all of those sorts of things, they're going to be shifting again as we bringing people in. And we just need, as part of your return to work plans, it's just a real focus on how is this going to affect people's emotional needs? How are they going to shift? And how are we going to cater for that as part of this new way of working?
Yeah, 100%. And that's a challenge in itself, given that everyone has different emotional needs. So again, it's figuring out the best possible solution overall. Pete, I know last time you were on the webinar, mental health was an important factor for you and your company. How are you kind of, what practical things are you doing to encourage good mental health?
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of tried our best throughout to be as flexible as possible. I mean, we talk about not having a hybrid model, but I mean, I was just chatting before I came up to our newest joiner, and she was amazed that once it gets to midday, people sort of look at you in the office if you're still here as being a bit weird because we expect everyone to go out and take a long lunch. Invariably, people will be out for 90 minutes to 2 hours at lunch. We pay for everyone's gym memberships. We currently are paying for everyone to go to one-on-one sessions at a boxing gym because it's 2-on-1. So we're trying to pair the team up with one another, someone from the ops team with someone from the investment team to just sort of get that socialization going again. We always want to be as flexible as possible with staff members and ensure that they're being looked after as best as possible. It's very difficult to know when someone is struggling, even in a small company. A lot of the time it will become apparent after the event, but at the present time, we're just trying our best to make sure that everyone feels comfortable being back in the office. If anyone has had any issues, they've been good at raising them to us. We've put people who are more concerned but still want to be into spare offices rather than having them out on the open plan floor. But I think on the mental health side of things, actually, as Greg and Sophie have alluded to, having people back together has actually really helped. Having people to talk to. I mean, it's the old saying, misery loves company. If you've been holed up in a small apartment, or I mean, most of our team live in London, and most of them are like 35 and under. So it's not like they all live in big places with gardens out in the country, or they're all in very small sort of either small houses or flats. And to get back out and get back into town has been a big thing for them. And again, as we now see things unlocking, and just look out the window, we've got a pub next door to us, which is fairly depressing because I had my window open earlier and you can hear everyone out there having fun. But it is just nice to hear people coming, like the normality returning. And I think more than anything we can do, that's actually what's going to be the biggest sort of alleviation of some of the stresses, is people seeing normality return around them. And I know it will be, some people will be on the other side of that and they will be fearful, and rightly so. I mean, there's well, whether it's the government or coronavirus, there's been a very good job done of scaring certain elements of society very much, and trying to unravel that is pretty difficult. And that's what I fear, is the sort of the shell shock or PTSD of the last 12 months starting to come through in the next 12 months, and making sure that when it does come through in all the ways it can, that we're on high alert and trying to look out for people on those occasions, because I still don't think we're through a lot of this yet. I still think as things unwind, we'll see effects we weren't expecting. I still think as furlough comes to an end, we're going to see unemployment tick up in ways that it hasn't thus far, because people have been protected. And I do think as a society as a whole, not just as a business owner, but as just as a compassionate human being, we all need to be aware that people are going to react differently as things unwind. And June 21st isn't the end of everything. It's even if that date gets stuck to, there's still going to be a lot to do from that date onwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Just you sort of touched on quite a lot of topics within that mental health aspect, but just kind of moving on to this sort of legal aspect. I know, Greg, you sort of touched on a few bits before in terms of health and safety, vaccines, testing, etc. What are some of the legal implications of being back in the office that you're seeing with your clients?
Yeah, so I suppose sort of thinking of what are the sort of questions that I'm being asked. I suppose first thing is where clients are asking people to come back to the office. Some people feel anxious at the prospect of whether it's commuting or just being in a shared office space. And for some of those individuals, they may have an underlying medical condition such that they may be classified as a disabled person for the purposes of the Equality Act. Well, why is that important? Well, if someone has a disability, you need to make reasonable adjustments, and you shouldn't subject them to a detriment as a consequence of things that flow from their disability. So if you've got someone saying, I'm not coming in for these reasons, and you get to a bit of a stalemate where you're saying, actually, we're telling you have to come in, and they say, we're not coming in, you could find that you're getting grievances or even tribunal claims that flow. Most clients, actually, I'd probably say all clients are pretty sensible at the moment. There's no absolute need for people to come back in. They're being very flexible. They're engaging with occupational health. They're trying to get to the bottom of how they can support these people. But you've then got others that are saying, okay, I'll come back in, but actually I've really enjoyed having the flexibility, or actually I need that flexibility because I now pick up my child at 3:15 and they sit in the corner watching TV until I clock off at 5:30. And for a lot of clients, that's been a little bit of a shock because they haven't really asked too many questions about how people are managing at the moment. So they're saying, well, hang on a moment, you're telling us you're looking after your children whilst you're working. And I say, yeah, and I've been fine, haven't I? Productivity hasn't dipped. They say, well, we're not really happy about that. The prospect of, pre-pandemic, you'd never imagine someone working from home and having their children there. But then we went through this period where that had to happen. So we're then finding there's a lot of flexible working requests coming through, either people saying, I want to work from home and have my kids here, or actually I want to split my hours. And there's then a lot of businesses having to reflect on, can we accept this? On a practical level, how do we service clients? How's this going to impact on how the other employees perceive the way that person's working? But with any flexible working request, be mindful of the ACAS guide on flexible working, but also just consider whether there could be a risk of discrimination in there. Is there any indirect sex discrimination, disability discrimination, philosophical, religious beliefs? Just be mindful of that, because it can catch people out. In terms of other legal issues, in terms of vaccines, I haven't had a client yet turn around and say, we're going to be mandating vaccines. No jab, no job type slogans that you see. I haven't had that. I've had some clients who have wanted to run campaigns or communications to try and encourage take up, which I think is fine. I've had some clients that have wanted to keep a record of when people have had their vaccines. And what you've got to be mindful is, if you're collecting data on testing or on vaccines, then that special category is health data. So under the Data Protection Act, you need to have done a data protection impact assessment. Why do you need the data? How are you going to use it? And most of the times when we're looking at that analysis with the clients, we normally get to the point where they say, actually, we're just going to have it, we're going to store it anonymously. We don't need to know who's had the vaccine. We just want to have a broad understanding of what percentage. And then if it's anonymous, you're not triggering data protection implications. You can't forget health and safety. Of course, if you're bringing people back into the workplace, you have to have done your COVID risk assessment. It has to be documented. Good practice is consult and communicate on that policy. Flip side, if you've got people working from home, you have to risk assess. And as part of those risk assessments, please make sure you've got a box looking at mental health and supporting people, because we're seeing a lot of grievances and claims coming through now where people are saying, I was raising a red flag, but no one came to help me. In fact, they just kept putting more pressure on me until I broke. And now that they're broken, they're bringing those tribunal claims, or potentially personal injury claims. So there's lots out there to consider, but I think overarching all of this is the culture. What is the culture you're trying to set within the organization? And whilst you're having to work your way through these rules or regs, just have the narrative, keep a conversation going, keep your communications up, because where clients I see getting it wrong is where they're just imposing. They've been thinking about their hybrid working policy for the last 6 months, but not telling anyone about it. And then it lands, and then it's a shock to people. And that's where you're getting those grievances. So the problem with most employment issues is just talk to your staff, engage them.
Yeah, I think that's something that we massively learned. We like as a leadership team, you're talking about it forever and a day, and then you're just not communicating effectively. And I think something we massively learned, and had to kind of sort of go backwards a little bit and just take a step back and just make sure that you're collaborating with your team, because there's obviously really good ideas, there's concerns that are raised that you may not think about. So I think that's really, really important. That's definitely a big learning for us as a business. I've had a good question, another good question actually, that I'm going to ping out to the panel. I don't mind who takes this. In terms of hybrid working, do you have any recommendations on how to manage face bias? So, for example, if an analyst is in 3 to 5 days a week, they see more favorably than an individual who's coming in 3 days a week. So, and how do you manage this and make managers aware? That's a really good question. Who'd like to take that one?
I don't mind.
Go on, Sophie.
So we've sort of called, it's sort of similar, but we've called that the us versus them, which is an outcome of hybrid working. So when you've got people coming in, and some people need to be at home more regularly now, as Greg was saying, and some people want to come in. And what can happen is the people who come in spend more time together, socialize, form a bond, and then it becomes the us versus the them who work from home. And then could be biases against, well, they're at home, they're not as productive maybe. And so we're really focusing on that. That's one of our big issues, to make sure that doesn't happen. We do a lot of all staff meetings and activities together to make sure everyone's included. But one of the big things we've encouraged, and part of the expectations we've set out on our document, is that when you're in a meeting, so if 3 of you are in person and 2 of you are at home and you're all joining at the meeting, you all need to join with your own laptop and your own headset. And that way everyone's coming to the meeting from the same perspective. So the people in the meeting room can't have little side conversations or discussions and almost ignore the people on video. So we're trying to put in practices in place to make sure we try and avoid these sorts of issues. And again, like Greg said, just try and really not discriminate indirectly or directly against people who have childcare responsibilities, or maybe that there is an element of sometimes women can be more discriminated against because they have to be at home more. And so just making sure that everyone can equally come to each activity or meeting from a similar standpoint, that's something we've really tried to encourage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like the idea of within your meetings, you basically everyone brings their laptop and everyone's talking through their screen rather than that's I actually hadn't heard of that, and that sounds really effective because it is really difficult when you've got half the team in, half the team working from home, and it's and then the sound's not good, or this there's technical issues to it as well.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point.
And just making sure no one's excluded, that's the thing. And we've given everyone these headsets. So though they're not the most attractive things, but everyone's got the same headset. We've put in webcams at all the desks in our new office. And then we've got to bring your own laptop AV equipment we've just implemented. So again, if you're in the meeting room, you need to take your laptop, and that's how it all works. Or if you're at your desk, you're all coming at the meeting from the same perspective.
Great. Thank you, Sophie. That was really insightful. Any further thoughts, Pete, Greg?
Go on, Greg.
I was just going to say, it's like any unconscious biasness, isn't it? I mean, we've been doing training on this for years and years, really, and it's just having that awareness. Like Sophie said, if you're setting up a meeting, how is this going to affect someone who needs to work from home? If you're doing a particular initiative, I love Pete's example of going boxing. I think that's brilliant, and I'd love to implement that where we are, but I think we're probably going to have more of a hybrid model going forward. So something that we've done is a thing called coffee connections. So every week you've got a different person where you need to create some time to sit down and have a virtual coffee connection, and we've sent everyone boxes of biscuits every now and again, or whatever it is, to facilitate that. Just a bit of a gimmick, really, just to remind people to do it. But actually what that developed in is people saying, rather than sit in front of a screen, let's just both go for a walk, and you could be in completely different locations or meet up. So it's creating opportunities for people to come together, but not forgetting that some people are going to be out of that office environment.
Yep, 100%. Pete?
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, it's a bit of a moot point if we've got everyone back in. It's not something I need to worry about, but it's something that we did see. And I think the them versus us that Sophie used the expression for, it was exactly the sort of thing you saw seeping in. It wasn't like it was a conflict scenario, but you certainly felt that some of the people who were out of the office felt like they were missing things that were happening because they were being discussed within the office informally, not when we were having company, because we were having 3 company-wide calls every week. We would always get everyone on, and even if there was nothing really to update people on, you'd just get everyone on, have a chat, check in on everyone. We'd be having sort of team calls, etc. I'd be having individual catch-ups, but then as time went on and more people came in, those sort of fell a bit by the wayside. When you've only got 2 people at home, we sort of lost the initiative of having those broader company calls, and it was unfortunate, and sadly for me, it was flagged to me by one of my staff members. They did say that we really enjoyed having those catch-ups, or I really enjoyed it, but then they sort of stopped when I was one of the only couple of people at the office, and I felt disconnected, and I was mortified. I feel like I really let that person down in that regard. So I immediately started on a monthly or fortnightly basis. Well, on a weekly basis, we had catch-up calls, but on a monthly basis, I would then travel out to them and go on a walk with them, as Greg just suggested, a socially distanced walk, and we'd spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just strolling around, catching up, making sure that they were okay personally and professionally. And it really did make a big difference for me. I mean, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but hopefully it helped them. But for me, it really made a difference. I felt connected again to that staff member who'd always been doing a fantastic job throughout the entire time. And that's sort of, I guess, why I kind of forgot about it to a degree. I was like, they're fine, they're cracking on. But actually, from their perspective, they were becoming more isolated. So it's probably one of the toughest lessons and one of the biggest pitfalls I've fallen into during all of this. And yeah, I'm to this day gutted that I didn't pick up on it beforehand, and it had to be flagged to me, because it's normally the type of thing I would consider myself fairly good at. But yeah, I think it's certainly something that we've seen, and it's something that having everyone back in allows us to avoid going forward. But again, I look at the group that we're sat with now, and I'd imagine a lot of the people dialing in were smaller, more familial types of firms, and we're able to do these things to sort of try and bring each other together. When you look at the bigger behemoth firms, the companies with thousands, tens of thousands of employees, without a shadow of a doubt, there's going to be bias towards those who are coming in if the management team are in. It's like anything. It's like, you know, there's bias towards people. There's presenteeism still in these big companies. Whatever anyone says, we still see it. I saw it when I worked in big firms. No one left their desk before a certain time, and no one left their desk until they'd seen other people leave their desk, and it clearly did count against people. It's going to be the same thing with this. When bigger companies see people pushing to work from home and other people in the office, it's those people who are in the office that are going to build the relationships and are going to advance quicker than those who are at home, because that's just the way those firms run. It's just we're in fortunate positions where we run firms that are small enough that we can try our best to avoid those sorts of biases.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's really, again, it's a really tricky balancing act. And you kind of, we sort of touched quite a bit on communication, and yeah, you're having to be really deliberate with communication. And I think, again, something we massively learned, you know, I think, you know, at the start, you know, everyone was on the adrenaline and communication was good and collaboration was good. And then over time, it's kind of, you know, you're having to work harder, and it's harder to do well. And again, you know, something we certainly had to revisit and improve on as a leadership team and as a business. So I think, yeah, that's really, really interesting. Just sort of moving on. Oh, actually, hold on a sec. We've got another question. Just let's just let's address this one. So really good one. On a really practical level, do you have any way of managing first aid, fire marshal, sole working responsibilities with a hybrid working model? Who wants to take that one?
I can go on that one.
Go on, Sophie.
So we've moved offices, and we are within a serviced office in a company called Spaces. So, you know, they have their main on-site fire marshals, first aiders, but before anyone could work in our office, I did a tour showing them every fire extinguisher, all the fire escape doors. I'm also making sure they have a copy of the fire evacuation procedure. There's a first aid kit fully on display in the office. Everyone's welcome to join and take part in a first aider course. We've actually got 3 to 4 first aiders out of 17 people, which is quite high. So, and we're doing mental health first aid courses too. So we're trying to make people self-sufficient. So if there's a fire and the alarm goes, they know exactly where they need to go. And again, we're trying to make sure as many people as possible are first aid trained, not just the limit of your number of staff members. So it is quite difficult. And again, we're still going to keep working on it, but I'm doing a lot of the risk assessments, making sure everyone is fully aware, and I'm getting everyone to sign that they have read the fire evacuation procedure, whether or not they've agreed or disagreed to be a fire marshal, and that they are aware of everything they need to know, so that if they go in the office on their own, they can be safeguarded.
Great. I think that's really comprehensive. Great. I don't know if you guys got anything else to add on that. Cool. Thank you, Sophie. That's really good. So just moving on to kind of a really important one for everyone, but particularly as us as recruiters, is kind of attraction and retention of talent. So the question I sort of had was, how will your individuals within the panel, will your way of working impact your ability to attract and retain top talent in the future? Pete, why don't we come to you with this one? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly torn on this subject. I mean, I've discussed this with several other people, and it's amazing how many people's first question now relates to work-life balance rather than the actual job itself when they come in for interviews, etc. And I sound like an old man, but I go back 10, 20 years, and the idea that would be the first question someone fired at you in an interview would be preposterous, because people would assume that showed a lack of commitment. In our current more open climate, and with everything that's happened over the last year, I actually have probably a newfound respect for someone who's asking that question and can understand that it can be coming from a very reasoned and sort of compassionate background. However, I still think that when it comes down to it, it's going to be the company and it's going to be the job. And sadly, well, for the society we live in, it's going to be the money we pay people as to whether they take the job. I did see the statistics that were on the report you guys sent through, and you said it would be a very important thing for a lot of people as to whether they had flexible or hybrid option. So it might mean we do miss out on some talent, and we might miss out on some great candidates, but we'll be very upfront when we send out job specs. When we talk to recruiters, we will say to them, this isn't going to be a flexible working role. Do not put candidates in front of us if they expect to be able to do 2 days a week at home, because it's not fair on the candidate to go through the process, and it's not fair on us to go through the process, then at the end to end up arguing with them about it. So we would look to avoid even coming into contact, so we probably wouldn't know whether or not we're missing out on a great deal of talent. And I think it's something we spoke about before when we were doing the prep work for this, and it's slightly off on a tangent, but I think us as a company, I come at things from a fairly rounded viewpoint, in that I look at things as an owner of the business and a director of a business, but also as an employee of that business, but also with the way we work, we invest into companies. So we're also shareholders, and fairly significant shareholders in certain businesses we invest in. And the thing, again, as all privately held firms, all of us guys work for privately held firms, so we manage our business how we see fit and look after our employees. For bigger firms that are publicly traded, their first part of call is to report to their shareholders. So if shareholders are seeing productivity drop in bigger firms because people are working from home, if Goldman's are all back in the office, yet UBS are half working at home, and Goldman's accelerate beyond UBS, UBS's shareholders are going to be on the back of the directors. They're going to be cutting their pay, and they're going to be pushing them to do things to change that. So however much staff enjoy it, at the end of the day, the decision will be made by the shareholders of the business and the bigger firms. And on the other side of that, if it doesn't affect productivity and people are still seeing people working from home doing a good job, you're going to see a push from shareholders to say, why are we paying these people London living wage? Why are we paying them that additional amount to work in London? They don't need to work in London. They can work from home. In fact, they can work from somewhere else in the UK entirely, or somewhere else in the world entirely, and we can pay them a fraction of the price. And that's what will happen further down the line if there's a big move towards home working from the bigger firms. I don't think they're all doing it out of a compassionate and lovely perspective that they all really care about the people that work for them. I think some of them are by stealth looking to cut costs significantly, cut office space costs, cut the cost of employees, and to then outsource or offshore substantial parts of what they do. And that, from a personal perspective, for me is pretty heartbreaking, because I don't want to see a bunch of like-minded individuals hollowed out of the workforce within London, but I also don't want to see London hollowed out itself, because I could see further down the line, if people don't feel they have to work in London, if people don't feel they have to recruit in London as a city, it could really suffer as a result. And our economy is all services led, and if we lose that and lose that advantage, it's going to impact us as an economy and as a society as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think actually Google, kind of announced their hybrid working, I think a month or so ago, and they said that they will be adjusting compensation according to new location. So I think there is some support to that, but the compensation is adjusted. So kind of your crystal balling, Pete, is perhaps already coming to fruition. Thank you for that. Greg, in terms of attraction, retention, what's your view?
We've had a couple of people join over the last few months, actually, that I don't think that we would have hired previously. So these are people that are looking for a more flexible way of working around childcare commitments. And actually, these are really great people, fantastic pedigree, who are brilliant workers as well, actually, just ferociously efficient and very good at what they do. So they've added a lot of value. So that was an ability, particularly being outside of London, to sort of cast our net a little bit wider. So that's been quite helpful. As a firm, I'm not sure if we had anyone that worked part-time, and certainly no one that worked remotely a couple of years ago. So there has, lockdown has accelerated a lot of change within our practice, I'd say for the better. I think one thing just to be mindful of as employers, when you're looking at your recruitment practices and whether or not you're saying you won't accommodate flexible, hybrid work, whatever it might be, is you need to have an eye to creating an objective justification in case anyone were to allege indirect discrimination. So you remember the old adverts where people would say need, young, flexible, full of energy, and then you'd have lots of old people say, hang on a moment, you were excluding me, I'm now going to sue you. And we get people who make careers out of bringing claims off the back of job adverts. If there's we are not accommodating flexibility, that is one thing, but we then need to have, as Pete's done, that thought process behind it and say, well, the reason we can't accommodate is because of X, Y, and Z, need to meet client demands, the industry that we work in, the way of working, so that you can back that up. But I would say at the same time is then think about your equality, equal opportunities piece within your business, because where you might not be able to offer flexible working, and potentially that may exclude some women from the pool you're recruiting from. So maybe you're not recruiting through women to your management team. Is how else are we going to attack this? How perhaps might you support the women that are in the business to come through? How are you going to report at that higher level? So just being, great opportunities for recruitment. Just be mindful of the practices of any discrimination that could creep in.
Yep, great. Thanks, Greg. Just conscious of time, we've got just 3 minutes left, and we've had a really good question come in. So are there any golden key answers on how you split decisions on flexible working? So if the majority of requests are from parents, do they have priority, or do you treat everyone the same? I think, Greg, we'll come to you on that one.
Yeah, of course. So really difficult, actually, because potentially if you've got, if the parents are predominantly women that are asking, then you might have to potentially favour their request unless you can objectively justify why you haven't. I had one for a client recently where they had husband and wife work for the same business, and they both made an application, and actually the client could confidently turn them both down without risk of sex discrimination because they treated them equally. I think there is a risk if you favour parents just as a bit of a knee-jerk, let's focus on them, they've got childcare responsibilities, is you then risk disengaging those other employees. And I think that has happened for a while, actually, with flexible working. People think, oh, how come they get to go early and then work from home? Actually, I'd quite like to go to the gym. I don't have any kids to look after, but I'd like that flexibility. So from a legal point of view, I think in terms of not a golden key answer, you just have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, doing that whole analysis with the Equality Act. Are there any risks? How's it going to affect our culture? What can we objectively justify? And that is what I spend most of my day on the phone talking to clients about.
Yeah, I can imagine. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Greg. We've got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up. Massive thanks to the panel. That was a really good discussion. So many key takeouts, which I hope were really useful for everyone in the audience. We've recorded the session, so we will send that out along with the key takeaways after the bank holiday. So kind of early part of next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, and you can obviously share that with colleagues, friends, etc., etc.